The sound of rushing water filled the morning air as David Chen stared in disbelief at the geyser erupting from his front yard. What had been a pristine lawn just hours earlier was now a muddy crater, with his severed water main gushing thousands of gallons into the street like an open wound bleeding the lifeblood from his home. Standing at the property line with bolt cutters in her hand and a satisfied smirk on her face was Linda Morrison, president of the Oakwood Heights Homeowners Association. Her perfectly styled blonde hair caught the morning light as she surveyed the destruction she'd just caused with the casual indifference of someone swatting a fly. "Should have read the fine print, Mr. Chen," Linda called out over the sound of rushing water, her voice dripping with the kind of toxic sweetness that could poison honey. HOA Covenant 247 clearly states that non-conforming landscaping violations result in immediate utility termination. David's hands shook as he fumbled for his phone to call the water department, his mind struggling to process what he was witnessing. "You cut my water line. That's destruction of property. That's criminal." Linda's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. "Actually, it's enforcement. The water line crosses HOA common property before reaching your house. We have every right to terminate service to residents who refuse to comply with community standards." Community standards. The phrase that had haunted David's life for the past 6 months, ever since he'd moved into Oakwood Heights and discovered that his new neighbors measured worth by the shade of grass and the angle of fence posts. The violation that had triggered this devastation was laughably minor. A vegetable garden in his backyard that Linda deemed agricultural and therefore inappropriate for their residential aesthetic. David had planted tomatoes and peppers, these same vegetables his grandmother had grown in her garden back in Taiwan. But to Linda Morrison, anything that deviated from her vision of suburban perfection was a threat that required elimination. "You're insane," David said, watching his water meter spin wildly as thousands of dollars worth of water poured into the storm drains. "No one has the authority to cut water service except the utility company." "Wrong again," Linda replied, pulling out her clipboard with the theatrical flourish of someone who lived for these moments of manufactured authority. "As HOA president, I have emergency powers to address immediate threats to community welfare." But what Linda Morrison didn't know, what her research into David Chen's background had missed entirely, was that the quiet engineer who'd moved into their exclusive neighborhood wasn't just another homeowner she could intimidate. He was about to teach her a lesson about the difference between assumed power and actual ownership. The aftermath of Linda's water terrorism spread through David's life like a slow-acting poison. Without running water, his home became uninhabitable within days. The insurance company refused to cover intentional HOA enforcement actions. Local plumbers quoted astronomical fees to repair the deliberately severed line, knowing he had no choice but to pay. But the physical damage was nothing compared to the psychological warfare that followed. Emergency HOA meetings were called to discuss David's ongoing violations. Neighbors who had been friendly before now crossed the street to avoid him. Anonymous complaints were filed with the city about everything from his mailbox height to his garbage can placement. Linda's army of suburban soldiers had turned his dream home into a daily nightmare. "This is harassment," David told the HOA board during one particularly brutal meeting. "Cutting someone's water line is not enforcement, it's sabotage." Linda's smile could have frozen hell. "Mr. Chen, perhaps you'd be more comfortable in a neighborhood with different standards. I hear there are lovely communities in Chinatown that might suit your cultural preferences better." The racial undertone wasn't subtle. It wasn't meant to be. Linda Morrison had built her little kingdom on the foundation of keeping tane elements out of Oakwood Heights, and David's presence threatened the careful balance she'd spent years maintaining. But what Linda didn't realize was that David Chen wasn't just any software engineer. His 20-year career had taken him from startup companies to Fortune 500 corporations, building systems that managed billions of dollars in transactions. More importantly, his quiet demeanor masked the calculating mind of someone who understood that the most devastating victories came not from emotional reactions, but from patient, methodical planning. While Linda celebrated her waterline victory, David was making very different kinds of calculations. He spent weeks researching Oakwood Heights' municipal structure, following the paper trails that connected city services to the community that had declared war on him. What he discovered was a web of relationships more fragile than Linda Morrison could have imagined. The Oakwood Heights water system wasn't owned by the city. It was operated by Clearbrook Municipal Services, a small private company that had held the exclusive contract for 20 years. The same company that Linda Morrison's husband had helped establish when he was on the city council. The same company that had grown fat and lazy on guaranteed revenue from affluent neighborhoods that never questioned their bills. More importantly, Clearbrook was family-owned, operated by second-generation managers who had inherited success without understanding the business. Financial records showed years of deferred maintenance, inflated administrative costs, and a debt structure that made the company vulnerable to anyone with sufficient capital and strategic vision. David made his first call to a business broker on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after Linda had turned his front yard into a lake. The conversation was brief, professional, and devastating in its implications. "I want to acquire Clearbrook Municipal Services," he said quietly. "The entire operation. How quickly can it be done?" The broker's silence stretched like a tightrope walker's balance. Finally, "Mr. Chen, that would give you control over water service for the entire Oakwood Heights region. Are you sure about this?" David looked out his hotel room window at the community that had tried to destroy him over a vegetable garden. Linda Morrison's house was visible in the distance, its perfect lawn maintained by water that flowed through pipes she thought she controlled. "I'm very sure," David replied. Linda Morrison had taught him that control over basic utilities was the ultimate power in suburban warfare. She was about to learn that lesson from the other side. The acquisition moved through legal channels with the efficiency of a precision military operation. David's software engineering background had made him wheel, but his investment portfolio had made him rich enough to buy small utility companies without significantly impacting his financial position. More importantly, his technical expertise gave him insights that Clearbrook's aging management had never possessed. The water system that served Oakwood Heights was inefficient, outdated, and vulnerable to the kind of modernization that could either save money or create very expensive problems for customers who had made his life miserable. The purchase closed on a Friday afternoon in October, exactly 2 months after Linda Morrison had destroyed his water line. David signed the final papers in a downtown law office, officially becoming the owner of every pipe, valve, and water main that served the community that had tried to drive him away. But the most satisfying discovery came buried in Clearbrook's customer service records. Linda Morrison's water bill was 6 months overdue. The HOA president, who had appointed herself judge and executioner over his utility service, had been stealing water from the very system he now owned. Her account showed a pattern of non-payment going back 2 years, with increasingly desperate notes from billing clerks who had been told to work with Mrs. Morrison due to her husband's political connections. David smiled as he reviewed the account. Linda Morrison had accumulated $4,847 in unpaid water bills while cutting other people's service for minor violations. The irony was so perfect it felt scripted. But the deeper he dug into Clearbrook's records, the more corruption he discovered. The Morrison family had been receiving free water service in exchange for steering the municipal contract renewals. Other HOA board members had similar arrangements. The entire water system had become a private benefit society for the same people who used utility access as a weapon against neighbors they wanted to eliminate. His first phone call as the new owner went to Clearbrook's customer service manager, a tired-sounding woman named Patricia, who had been fielding complaints about the Morrison account for months. "Patricia, this is David Chen, Clearbrook's new owner. I want you to send termination notices to every account that's more than 90 days overdue. No exceptions, no special arrangements. Sir, some of those accounts belong to city officials and HOA board members. They've had accommodations." "Not anymore," David replied, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had learned that real power came not from shouting, but from controlling the systems that Matty read. "Water service is a business transaction. No payment, no water." As he hung up the phone, David realized that Linda Morrison had done him a profound favor. Her attack had revealed the corruption that made her little kingdom possible. Now he owned the kingdom, and the Queen was about to discover that the peasant she'd tried to crush had become the king. The confrontation came on a Tuesday morning when Linda Morrison discovered that her shower had run dry. She marched to David's house in her silk bathrobe and designer slippers, her face twisted with the kind of rage that came from having the natural order disrupted by someone she considered beneath her station. "Fix my water immediately!" she screamed, pounding on his front door with manicured fists. "This is harassment! This is retaliation!" David opened the door calmly, dressed in a business suit and carrying a briefcase that suggested he had more important things to do than deal with entitled neighbors. "Good morning, Linda. I assume you're here about your water service. Don't play games with me, Chen. I know this is revenge for the enforcement action against your property violations." "Actually," David replied, pulling out a folder thick with legal documents, "this is business. Clearbrook Municipal Services has terminated service to your address due to non-payment. Your account is $4,847 past due." The color drained from Linda's face as the implications hit her. "That's impossible. I have an arrangement with the water company." "You had an arrangement with the previous owners," David corrected, his voice carrying the finality of a judge reading a sentence. "I'm the new owner of Clearbrook Municipal Services, and my policy is simple. No payment, no water." Linda's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, the same water she no longer had access to. "You can't do this. I'm the HOA president. I have emergency powers." David's smile was colder than Arctic ice. "Emergency powers over HOA property, Linda, not over private water companies, the same way you had no right to cut my service when you destroyed my water line." The realization hit Linda like a physical blow. She had taught David Chen that utility control was the ultimate weapon in suburban warfare. Now he was holding that weapon, and she was completely defenseless. 6 months later, Linda Morrison's HOA sat empty with a for sale sign swaying in the wind. Unable to pay her water bills and facing federal charges for utility fraud, she'd fled Oakwood Heights like a refugee from her own tyranny. David stood in his backyard, tending to the vegetable garden that had started this entire war. His tomatoes were thriving, his peppers were abundant, and his grandmother's recipes would be blessed with ingredients grown in soil watered by the same system he now controlled. The new HOA board had formally apologized for Linda's actions and revised their covenants to eliminate discriminatory enforcement. Property values had actually increased once word spread that the neighborhood was under new, fair management. Most importantly, David had established the Chen Community Water Fund, providing free service to families struggling with utility costs. The same system that Linda had used as a weapon now served as a tool for community support. His wife joined him in the garden, carrying their young daughter who was learning to tend plants the way David had learned from his grandmother. "The water company inspector is coming tomorrow," she mentioned casually. David smiled, adjusting the irrigation system that kept his vegetables healthy and strong. "Let him come. This time we control the flow."